Welcome back to Sputnik. Now, it's a controversial view, but as someone who has been a driver for almost 50 years, there's never been a time when I've enjoyed driving less. Road narrowing in London has literally driven me out of the city. I've moved to rural Scotland, where, of course, I rely on my car even more than I did before. It may well have been well-intentioned, but it is undeniably driving millions of drivers to distraction. And then along comes the news that 10 years earlier than we had originally been told, we'll all have to move to electric cars by 2030. It's going to be a tall order to get the infrastructure for that in place. I thought it was a good idea to talk to Brian McDowall of the British Drivers Association to see if he had been driven to distraction like me. Brian, thanks very much for joining us. I'm only joking. It's still a joy to get behind the wheel, but only on the open road. And open roads are increasingly hard to find, aren't they?
Well, they are, George. I'm glad you're still driving. The fact of the matter is that whatever way you measure it, the length of roads we got, the amount of money we invest in them, we come out worse for congestion, least amount of mileage in roads, and some of the most highest taxed drivers in the world. It's not a good story, and it could be better.
That point that you make is one that is in every driver's mind, I think. We are the highest taxed drivers in the world. And yet, when we go abroad to the continent, as we must learn to call it again, we usually think these roads are better than ours, and they're paying less for them than we are.
Well, true. A good way of comparing things is to compare us against our European neighbours. If you look at a basket of about 15 to 19 countries, we are about 8th or 9th in terms of car ownership. But when it comes to road lengths and money invested, we are 2nd or 3rd from bottom. And that disparity has gone on for years. When you add into that the £1 billion a week that the Chancellor is extracting from drivers, and I include in that indirect taxation, which a lot of politicians carefully omit, then we are not getting anything like the first-class road service and maintenance schedule we deserve. We're being fleeced.
Now, the road narrowing in London to which I refer, it literally has caused chaos. But is it for the greater good? I mean, wouldn't it be a good thing if millions of people were now to take up cycling in these brand new cycle lanes?
Absolutely. We're not against cycling or any other kind of health and exercise, but that's a lifestyle choice. It shouldn't be forced on you by narrowing or removing or reallocating existing road space, which is already in short supply. And you know, cycle journeys, a lot of those lanes, including the pop-up ones, which are disasters, are so underused. So we have less road space and a mode of transport which has more road space but doesn't have the numbers to justify it. It's madness, and it's a very expensive madness. 250 billion of hard-earned taxpayers' money has gone into these schemes.
It's, of course, taboo to criticize cyclists. We all wish them well. I'm frankly too old now to cycle as my primary means of transport. I must, because I have a big family with many young children, I have to use my car. This is an irresistible force and an immovable object, isn't it? Why do you think politicians have chosen to err on the side of the cyclist when there are many millions more motorists than there are cyclists? Has the motoring lobby failed, do you think, in its task?
The motoring lobby could put its case more strongly. It needs to find more allies. Unfortunately, the political class over the last 30 to 40 years has stepped on the climate change agenda, and the chief scapegoat in that agenda is people who own and use their own vehicles. That is their number one pet hate. So regardless of the fact that petrol and diesel engines are 60 to 70% cleaner than they were 50 years ago, despite all the other technological advances, they've gone down this narrow route, listening to a small, hard core of zealots who want people out of their cars, walking and cycling and using, strangely enough, public transport, a form of motorised road user. That this narrow, zealot-minded lobby completely controls the political thinking of all the major parties, and that other big lobby that has such influence on them, the United Nations, who is and getting people out of their cars, is very much of the UN agenda.
That leads me on to the second part of what I want to talk to you about. Climate change is real. Global warming is real. Vehicular traffic contributes to that global warming. Everyone in electric cars would, in theory, be a good idea. I was resigned to it by 2040, where, if God preserves me, I'll certainly not still be driving. But now it's going to be 2030, which is, if you'll forgive the pun, just round the corner. What's the association's view on the switch to electric cars, the banning of buying new petrol and diesel cars by 2030?
The best way to find out whether something all works is to allow the market to come to its own conclusion. People will vote with their own wallets, forcing a change on them, which is going to require in the order of several billion to get the power generating capacity up to standard, is simply not going to work. You'd be lucky if it even works by 2040, but you're forcing a change. Typically, a Tesla, which is one of the most well-known electric vehicle models around, you can buy those for 60, 70, 80,000 pounds a time. They're 4 times the normal car might cost. They're out of the pockets, they're out of the reach of most people who are lucky. If the government goes through with this, will get no more than a pittance in the way of scrappage. It's just unrealistic. The infrastructure cannot cope.
Well, speaking as someone who finds it hard to keep their phone charged, I foresee a future for the breakdown services coming to the rescue of cars that have run out of power. It's inconceivable at the moment that the infrastructure for charging could be solved in just 9 years. I mean, we're almost 2021. But
yes,
this price issue that you mentioned is, of course, in a way, the bigger problem. How can the ordinary man and woman in the street afford a Tesla?
They simply cannot. The national average wage is about £27,000. If a Tesla is going to cost you 80 grand, plus servicing, because the battery is a huge component of it, it's going to be out of your reach for a start. Now, typically, someone who can drive and drive to work has about 5 times the amount of choice of employment that someone uses public transport. So the net result of this is that people are going to be forced off the road if they can't afford to drive. And when they're off the road, if they can't earn an income, they'll have to be on benefits. This is absolute madness. It's forcing a technological change, and only one change. It's electric or nothing. You notice that in the ban, it also includes hybrid cars, not just petrol and diesel. So we're going for one choice only. It's roads for the rich.
Yes, I mean, that's going to be hard to sell electorally. You wonder why Boris Johnson has opted for this option. Personally, I have 3 school runs to do. I need to drive in order to earn a living, in order to pay plenty of tax. What's the government going to do to replace all these billions that you mentioned that are currently being paid in tax by the drivers?
At the moment, they're going down the route of walking, cycling, public transport. They're going to be your options. There is this hierarchy previously denied that the car, and including freight, comes down the bottom of that hierarchy. Now in the open, they think that people can push en masse into these low-use forms of transport. I mean, cycling, for instance, 1% of all the journeys clocked up in the UK. Motorised transport, 500 billion miles a year clocked up. That's how the economy keeps going, and that's how we get prosperity. It just simply won't happen. And it's about time that electric vehicles pay road tax. At the moment, they're free. If they're going to introduce a charging structure, then it's got to be commensurate with what the fuel, the petrol and diesel that people put into those engines. But that's all yet to come, and it's a massive cost. You can see where this is going to end. You're going to end up with far higher bills for everybody.
Well, it's only around the corner. You and I, God willing, will still be at work, still behind the wheel by the time this change happens. We need to put our foot on the gas on this one, I think, Brian. Brian McDowall of the Alliance of British Drivers. Thanks for joining us on board the Sputnik.
Thank you.